Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, you know what? Last night was kind of interesting, or this early morning now was kind of interesting because the Conservatives had a leadership convention and something happened with envelopes or something like this, and they couldn't announce the winner for a while. But Aaron O'Toole is the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. So I wanted to check in with a buddy of mine, a Conservative strategist, long-term activist within the Conservative Party, and a really nice guy. Darryl Wolk is his name. He worked with me on the Mississauga Summit, Peel Fair Share Task Force, and a whole bunch of other things. Darryl, how are you?
I'm doing great, and it's nice to be back on the show. I've been following the podcast there, and you've been lining up some great guests, Bob McCowan, Andrea Horwath, Jennifer Keysmat, great mix of covering all the topics you're passionate about, as well as myself, politics, business, fashion, culture. I mean, I think you're doing a great job with the show, and glad to be back.
Oh, I appreciate the shout out. Thanks, Darryl. I appreciate that very much. So tell me, what happened last night, and were you surprised by both the delay and then the ultimate, I guess, third ballot victory by Aaron O'Toole?
Yeah, no, I mean, the delays, I think we've come to expect now at leadership conventions. I know the one with Premier Ford lasted quite a long time and had similar issues. I remember being younger, waiting up and watching the Dalton McGuinty leadership race that finished at 3 or 4 in the morning or something. And even one of the more exciting ones, which was Stéphane Dion winning the Liberal leadership. I know it lasted a long time, but was interesting television. I think the good thing about the delays was you had an important Raptor playoff game that we were able to watch waiting for the results, and WWE SummerSlam. So ultimately, when the results did finally come in, I think it was a bit of a lost opportunity. I think Aaron O'Toole would have liked to have done a speech to hit the news cycle, and perhaps earlier than 1 in the morning when everybody except the most partisan people had gone to sleep. But ultimately, I thought the race was a little quiet going into it, but it seemed to be a little bit more exciting as the results started to come in, and we got a bit of a clear picture of what the members were looking for.
So tell us what happened. So Peter MacKay was first on the first ballot?
Yeah, Peter MacKay, I think, throughout the conference or throughout the race, was the front runner, and I think it was expected that he was going to do well on the first ballot. The reality was early in the race, I think he made some initial gaffes around communications, but especially the comment about the Conservatives missing an empty net and social conservatives being a stinking albatross. That really limited his ability to pick up second ballot support. And a lot of the insiders were saying if he didn't come in with at least 40% in the first ballot, then he was going to have trouble, similar to what happened to Maxime Bernier in 2017.
So tell us, where was he on the first ballot?
He got 33%, and I think where a lot of the surprise was O'Toole came in around 31%. The biggest surprise being that he won the most points in Quebec. I think there was a lot of fear coming into the leadership race that what would happen is because of the way the point system works, each riding gets 100 points, rather you have 49 members in downtown Montreal or thousands of members in Calgary. So there was a scenario that I think some Conservatives feared that MacKay would win the most points but lose the popular vote, and potentially that would cause some issues with Wexit and Western alienation. But surprisingly, O'Toole did really well in Quebec, and I think that ultimately set the tone. The other factor was Leslie Lewis. To be honest, I had never heard of her before the race started, but probably of all the candidates, she impressed me the most, and clearly that was reflected in the results last night, winning Saskatchewan, finishing second in Alberta, and really doing much better across the province for somebody who's never held public office before and didn't have a huge obvious background within the party.
So if Peter MacKay was 33 and Aaron O'Toole was 31, where was Dr. Leslie Ann Lewis?
She came in on around 20% on the first ballot, and then surprisingly, when Sloan fell off, it looked like, based on the results, she probably took in 95% of his second ballot support, which put her within 1,000 of the two front runners. But ultimately, once Lewis fell off the ballot, then O'Toole was able to win 57-43.
So I got to tell you, I was really wondering whether it was going to be comparable to, as you mentioned earlier, the Stéphane Dion victory leadership, where he actually was in in third place, but jumped into second by a very small margin because of people dropping off. And so therefore, surprisingly went ahead of the number 2 candidate, Bob Ray. So I was really wondering whether Derek Sloan's people going to Leslie Ann Lewis might put her ahead of one of the two of them. Do you think people were worried about that or thinking about that?
Well, I think the big difference between the Liberal convention that you refer to and the way the Conservative one works is right at the beginning. 2 weeks ago, I submitted my ballot. You have to rank 1 through 4. Things could change on the convention floor based on the results after the first ballot. But by that point, there's no opportunity to really change your way of thinking. So ultimately, really, the ballots probably should have been counted on Saturday, so there wouldn't have been as many mistakes on Sunday with the process. But ultimately, I think when you have a delegated convention, it becomes more interesting when the leadership candidates woo you in the hospitality suite, or you see some of your friends going over to another candidate, and it makes for great TV. I remember Hazel playing a role in the Charles Sousa race that led to Kathleen Wynne winning, and certainly that makes for more interesting television. But once you cast your ballot and send it in the mail, there's no changing at that point.
So it's interesting. I interviewed Dr. Leslie Ann Lewis, and she was very socially conservative in both the conversation I had with her and I think during the campaign. What this says, isn't it, is that there is a very strong social conservative faction within the Conservative Party.
Well, there's no question. I mean, it was the social conservatives last night that determined the results. And as I said, I think that the biggest mistake McKay made was the comment about the social conservatives being a stinking albatross. The reality is similar to the union base within the NDP. The social conservatives tend to raise a lot of the money. They're certainly the activists that go door to door. They are well organized. And I think what it led to many people appealing to Dr. Leslie Lewis was certainly she had the education, qualifications as a lawyer. She had run previously with the party. But she certainly was a true conservative on top of that, and certainly a great diverse voice for the party. And I certainly hope that she sticks with the party, runs in the next election, and I think she'd make a great cabinet minister.
Well, I was surprised at her support, both from a money standpoint as well as from a number of people standpoint. When I interviewed her, she was incredibly articulate, very passionate about her views, but very socially conservative, both on abortion rights as well as gay rights.
Yeah, I think there's two narratives that the media tries to push in every PC race. I think the first is that there's some sort of feud still between the Reform and the PC party. And I think that's more an issue that outsiders look at compared to insiders. And in every leadership race I've seen within the Conservative Party, at least the last 5, the central issue seems to be, do you want a more centrist, moderate candidate, or do you want to go with a so-called true blue choice? And if you look at what happened with Ford, what happened with Patrick Brown, what happened with Scheer last time, as opposed to, say, Lisa Raitt and Michael Chong, moderates don't traditionally do that well in Conservative leadership races. And I think it's difficult if you come into the party and try and make drastic changes given the base. And we sort of saw that with Patrick Brown when he wanted to take the party in a much different direction and caused a lot of unease among the base.
So you and I had a couple of conversations last September and October during the federal campaign. And I think the assessment that both of us had was that one of the reasons why the Conservatives didn't do better in the 905 was because of Andrew Scheer's social conservatism, and it didn't resonate with suburban Ontario. Is this victory for Aaron O'Toole and the fact that social conservatives, as you say, decided the leadership, a negative for them in the next election?
I think what you'll see is with Aaron O'Toole, he certainly positioned himself to go after the right in the party. But having known him over the years, he's actually in reality a moderate, very similar to Peter MacKay. He's certainly pro-choice. In his speech, he seemed to try and be inclusive and broaden the Conservative tent, including mentioning LGBT. I think the issue that probably helped him in this race was because Peter MacKay had offended so many social conservatives, he didn't really have to go out of his way to make promises that'll cripple him in a general election. But having said that, you can't deny the fact that he owes his victory to Lewis and Sloan's second choice. And, ultimately what probably surprised me the most about this race, it didn't get a lot of attention with the pandemic or didn't seem to have a whole lot of water cooler talk around it. yet somehow a record membership voted yesterday. And as soon as I saw that the numbers were higher than expected in terms of the turnout, then I knew Peter MacKay was probably going to be in some trouble.
Really? So it was the increased number of people that were voting, the increased turnout, rather than the establishment that effectively sealed Peter MacKay's demise.
Yeah, in any race, you're looking for that leader who's going to draw big crowds and sell huge amounts of memberships. And to be honest with you, I didn't see a whole lot of activity on the membership sales or excitement around either MacKay or O'Toole. So when I saw what the numbers were, it seemed to me that it was a lot of social conservatives signing up. And I think that was reflected in Sloan and Lewis's early results, and ultimately was why they were able to be the kingmakers in this race.
What about the fact that Peter MacKay, had promised they wouldn't combine with the alliance, and the whole, who was it, someone Orchard that he did a deal with back, a bunch of years ago. Did that come up at all in the campaign?
I think generally in the sense of like progressive conservative or centrist versus the more reform or true blue certainly was the dynamic between O'Toole and MacKay. I don't think people look at the decision that MacKay made to merge the party and see that as a negative. I mean, this is a conservative leadership race, so everybody is a fan of Stephen Harper. They're a fan of the parties merging together and allowing them to get into power for a period of time. And certainly there's a lot of unity behind wanting to defeat Justin Trudeau. But I think in MacKay's case, it was really just the early blunders that kind of killed his momentum as a front runner, particularly when he left the interview. Some issues around Twitter where his staff was tweeting things he wasn't aware of, and just comments that made it difficult to reach out past his initial base. And I also thought that the pandemic put all the candidates in a tough position. Do you come out and criticize Justin Trudeau? Do you play the unity card and say that you want to work together to get us through this emergency? So it was a very unique situation. The other thing that I think people look at within the party and analyze later was Aaron O'Toole picked up Jeff Ballywell's support, who's behind Ontario Proud in the post-millennial. And given this wasn't a leadership race where you're able to go and attend local events, it was all social media for the most part. And I mean, that guy Jeff has certainly changed social media within the Conservative Party, and the amount of influence that came through that, I think really put O'Toole over the top.
Tell me more about him. I don't know him.
He's a digital guy, similar to Stephen Taylor, who founded Blogging Tories. Certainly if you look at they're not really media sites. I disagreed with Scheer's speech last night that we should ignore all mainstream media and only pay attention to True North and Post Millennial. But I know the Liberals have North 99 and the NDP has Press Progress. The Conservative version of that is Ontario Proud and the Post Millennial. And ultimately, Jeff Ballywell was the person behind it. He became Aaron O'Toole's digital campaign manager, and ultimately the data lists that come from that, plus the amount of reach it has, I think really got O'Toole's name out there where perhaps he was less well known at the beginning.
Andrew Coyne made a very negative comment in regards to Aaron O'Toole's acceptance speech, said it was comparable to a high school kind of speech. What did you think of the speech?
I think that was Scheer's exit speech, if I'm not mistaken, where he was threatening about international movements with Soviet threats and ultimately dismissed the mainstream media. And it did kind of sound angry. I think one of the challenges, from my personal opinion, was during the pandemic, Scheer was the face of the party every single day. I don't think he did the best job putting the Conservatives in a compassionate light, given the situation. And one thing that O'Toole's going to have to think about is the team that he surrounds himself with, the face and the message that we portray. And I don't think people want to see an angry, always attacking Justin Trudeau type party. I think they want to see inclusive tent. I think they want to see some sound economic and fiscal policies. I think they want the Conservatives to recognize that there's a lot of people hurting and that the only issue can't just be the balanced budget. But ultimately, I think Aaron O'Toole is a pretty good balance in terms of being able to unify the party. And I don't think he's going to have the type of baggage that Scheer might have had in the last election.
Is there room for red Tories in the Conservative Party today?
I would say absolutely. I mean, my personal opinion is that the political spectrum generally is moved left. I think the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau is a lot closer to the NDP. It sounds like he's going to be coming out with some sort of AOC, Bernie Sanders type Green Deal with the throne speech. If Liberals go in that direction, I would honestly have to ask what does that mean for the Paul Martin type liberals who, cared about things like fiscal responsibility and creating a competitive business environment?
Okay, so what you're saying is that you don't think fiscal conservatives or blue liberals have a room in the Liberal Party, rather than that red Tories have room in the Conservative Party. So where do moderates go? If the social conservatives have decided the leadership and are controlling the Conservative Party, and the Liberal Party has moved to the left and is closer to the NDP and no longer has room for the Paul Martin blue liberals or fiscal conservatives, where do moderates go in Canada today?
Well, I think, in my opinion, the Conservative Party has actually moved a lot closer to the center than perhaps it was under Harper and certainly under the Reform Alliance. I think that, we're obviously facing a lot of challenges. We've got a global pandemic happening. There's going to be a long multi-year economic recovery. And I think the only way that we're going to be able to move forward is to have an election campaign and for one of the leaders to secure a mandate on the path forward. And I think when the election comes, and it could be this fall, it could be the spring, but ultimately it's going to be one of the most crucial elections that Canada's ever faced. We could be facing $1 trillion deficit. Ultimately, our GDP is at Great Depression levels, along with our unemployment. There's a lot of concern out there right now as mortgage deferrals come due, as rent has to be paid, as people struggle to get back to work. And I think we're going to need a sound plan about how to get Canada going again. And, you're probably not going to see that debate in the House of Commons, where it tends to be heavily partisan, and I'm sure they'll focus on the WE scandal. But at some point, Canada needs a plan to recover and move past this. And I think this election will be important for all parties to put their ideas and solutions out there and let Canadians decide which is the best way forward.
We're talking to Darryl Wolk tonight, a conservative strategist and a long-term associate of mine in Mississauga and Peel politics, as well as he's been involved in conservative politics for probably his whole life. He's run a couple of times for regional council and deputy mayor and a whole bunch of other things. And I'm convinced he's going to have a big role in Canadian politics in the future, just like he has in the past. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break for some messages and be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Darryl Wolk. I wanted to check in with him. He's a conservative strategist in regards to what happened last night and this morning with the conservative leadership. And, I was surprised that Erin O'Toole won on the third ballot. And, Darryl, you mentioned Dalton McGuinty. Dalton McGuinty, I think, was, I can't remember what choice he was, but it took him 4 ballots to win. Stéphane Dion was in third place, and it took him 3 or 4 ballots to win. Do people that are the compromise candidates end up being victorious?
I think for all the candidates, to some degree, just by running, you increase your profile and your chances to go to cabinet if the party that you're running for forms the government. I think Leslie Lewis, you can make the argument, was potentially the big winner last night. And certainly if this escalates her to a front bench, then ultimately, that'll be a win for her down the road. Fortunately for Peter MacKay, I think he's going to have to decide, does he want to continue running in politics as a number 2 finance man or a deputy prime minister or in a key cabinet role, or does he want to move on with his life? He's probably not feeling like a victor today.
He's certainly not.
Yeah, and then when it comes to Sloan, I think that, he may have rubbed some people the wrong way, but at the end of the day, he did get his social conservatives out and they made an impact. So, will he sort of disappear like Trost, or will he, champion that constituency within the party? I guess we'll see. But I think generally, if you keep running or you put your name forward, you end up in a pretty good position. At least you're guaranteed some sort of major role with the party.
So the Bloc Québécois said they're going to bring a non-confidence vote because of the WE controversy. The Conservatives, I gotta believe, are going to vote non-confidence. Do you think the NDP will vote non-confidence and we'll have an election this fall?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that if it was up to the Conservatives, I think they'd prefer a spring election. It would be their best strategy to get past all the Donald Trump election that's going to happen and avoid being compared to that. I don't completely understand the Bloc position, given that, an election, what do they really have to gain? They're not going to form government. They're not running seats across the country, and they already did well last time. But having said that, the Bloc has distanced themselves from the Liberals and already indicated that they're going to be voting against the throne speech. I would almost certainly tell you that the Conservatives will be supporting the bloc non-confidence motion, voting against the throne speech and the budget, any other confidence vote that comes up. And I think the NDP is going to face an incredibly tough choice. Some sort of ethics report is going to come down on Morneau and Trudeau. There's no question that for this government to survive, the NDP will have to write the speech. And I think they're going to ask for something huge, like a basic income, universal childcare, or pharmacare as their beginning position. And I'm personally wondering if Trudeau is even serious about passing this. I think he's just going to simply come back with a re-election platform, expect that he gets defeated, blame the opposition parties for not helping people with the eye, and then try to do his best to run off the U.S. election comparing O'Toole to Trump.
And have a fall election in the middle of a pandemic?
I think there's a good chance it's going to happen. I think the only way that this government survives is if the NDP wants to get into a formal coalition, because even if they negotiate something huge like pharmacare, it'll take years to implement that. So essentially, they'll be forced to vote for every single confidence vote that comes up until that's implemented.
So will we be back to the whole controversy about whether coalitions are good or bad?
No, I think for the NDP, it's mostly a decision based on finance. It's well known that they're not in a good financial position. But having said that, this might be an opportunity. It's a lot cheaper to run a Zoom election than it is an election where you have to get planes and buses and travel. So, I mean, if the Wee scandal gets bad enough, they're probably best to distance themselves from the Liberal, champion themselves as the progressive voice, and see if they can benefit off any decline in Liberal support.
So if we have an election this fall, what's going to be the ballot box question?
I think at some point the economy, ultimately because of the social assistance and the government response so far, I don't think there's been a lot of pain felt. But when you're looking at the numbers at Great Depression levels, at some point that's going to catch up with us. And I think if the banks start foreclosing on people's houses and people get evicted and the unemployment stays elevated, Canadians are going to be hurting, and they're going to want to see a clear economic plan to get back to prosperity. And certainly that'll be top of mind, in my opinion. Who knows? We're starting to see in the United States some issues around the COVID restrictions. Does that become an election issue? I've always wondered what would happen if an election sort of met social distancing. And then you're going to get your usual suspects: the environment, certainly Indigenous rights, what's happening with the BLM movement. And I think given the state of the economy, certainly social programs, whether it's social assistance, childcare, some sort of a housing plan, those are all going to be high priorities for Canadians suffering right now.
Well, Darryl Wolk, political activist in the Conservative Party and a whole bunch of other things. Thank you so much for giving us your thoughts on the Conservative leadership campaign and convention yesterday and the victory by Aaron O'Toole. Congratulations to Aaron O'Toole. By the way, I did interview him as well, and I thought he did a spectacular job both on my interview and during the campaign. I was really quite impressed with him. And I think one of the answers in people that win on second or third ballots is that something a lot of political people forget about is that while you're competing against people in a convention within a party, you also have to make friends with people. And what happened here is that Aaron O'Toole made friends, and Peter MacKay did not make friends with other people, with the other candidates, with the other campaign teams. And that's a mistake that I think Michael Ignatieff made in the past, and maybe Patrick Brown made as well. And so while you're competing, you still got to make friends. And that's one of the things that I like about you, Darryl. We have different politics, but we've always been great friends. So I've appreciated your friendship and your advice and your camaraderie. So thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your friendship as well, and happy to do the show anytime there's a race, any party, and keep doing a great job with the show.
That's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour for Saga 960 tonight. Thanks, and have a good evening.